Up until previously, I obsessively used Create React App whenever I wanted to create a new React app, and I still absolutely love it. But recently I've been using Next.js for more and more sites. It has so many great features built in, like routing and server-side rendering, that offer amazing experiences both for the end user and for developers. So Next.js is a React meta framework, which means that it's a framework built on top of React that enforces more structure and gives you some additional capabilities, again, like SSR and routing and bundling and more. So in this post, we'll go through how to get started with Next.js, the difference between SSR and SSG, and if those just sound like letters to you, then I will break them down later in the video, and then we'll also talk about routing. If you haven't used React before, I'm gonna have you pause and I'll link to my Getting Started with React tutorial. And once you've done that, then you can come back and do this tutorial, but you do need a React foundation before using this. So we're gonna create an app that lists colors on a home page. Each one's going to link to a color page that displays the colors information. So first we'll go ahead and initialize a Next.js app. So I'm going to start with creating a Next app. Actually, while preparing for this video, I accidentally did Create React App instead of Create Next App. So they're very similar to one another. Create Next App is going to generate a Next.js app for you. And I'm going to call it Color Pages. So I'm going to change into that directory, and then I'm going to run npm run dev in order to start my development server. I'm going to also open up my text editor here so you can see a little bit of what was generated. So you have your node modules, you have public, which has right now just a favicon and the Vercel logo. And then there are some styles built in. It has CSS modules built into it by default. That's not my preferred way of doing CSS, but it is really helpful if that is the way that you write your CSS. I can link to resources if you want to learn more about it. And then there is this pages directory, and that's kind of where the magic happens. This is where we're going to create our different files, and then they will be included in our app. So I'm going to start off actually by not using these. I'm going to first create a data directory. So not within pages, just within my app. And then within there, I'm going to create a file called colors.json. You could use the command line to generate these as well. I just tend to use VS Code. And then I'm going to paste in this colors.json. And you could create something from scratch, but essentially what I'm just doing here is I have an array of objects, and those objects have the key name and the key hex. I mostly use Pantone colors of the year for this, so illuminating, and then its hex code, classic blue, and its hex code. And I'm going to do this to create color swatches on my app. So you can use your own colors if you want. Just make sure to use this format so that the rest of the tutorial still makes sense. And I will link to this one down in the description bar if you want to copy and paste it, because it's a little annoying to retype. Hence why I did not do it. Okay, so right now in the pages directory, we can go back to that. We have the API directory. This is used if you want to create API routes. We won't dive into that in this tutorial, but it's something good to check out if you want to go deeper with Next.js. So I'm going to delete that, move it to trash. App.js is going to be my top level component, and it's going to render my other pages. So it'll render whatever component is passed to it. So if you wanted to add a header that was put on every single page, or you want to include your global styles or anything like that, this is the file to do that in. The index.js is going to be the home page. So right now, if I go to localhost 3000, which is where my server is running, you can see that this page pops up and it says like welcome to Next.js and how to get started and all that. So I'm actually going to clear this out, but it gives you a little bit of a preview of what this page might look like in the future. I'll actually keep the head tag in here, and we'll tweak that down the road. So the really nice thing is if you want to create different routes, you can just create a file. So if I wanted to do about.js, that could be my about page. Then I could create a React component here and say return about page or something along those lines. Now if I navigate to /about, it will render this page. So all that I need to do to create routes is to create a new file within the pages directory, and Next.js will work its magic and make it so that that file name turns into a route in my application. And of course, nothing is actually magic. It's just other people's code. I just want to put that in there. I keep saying magic, but it's not actually magic. Okay. So I have that about page. I can delete it. I'm not actually going to use this in my app, but I just wanted to show you how to create pages like this. I am going to instead create a new file here and call it color.js. But you can notice that color is in square brackets. And that's saying that this is actually a parameter. So color is essentially a variable within my URL instead of being the word color. So it's not /color, it's /pink or /blue or /fuchsia. And that will render my color page. You could also create nested routes by doing a folder called color and then the color.js within that or something along those lines. So that's how you create different URLs within Next.js. I find this really handy. You don't need to use something like React Router or anything like that. This is built in and one of the best developer experience things that I have used within framework. Now we have this color.js file that's in pages, and what we're going to do is we're going to create our component here. So the first thing that we're going to need to do, we're going to create a special function called getStaticPaths, and it does kind of like what it sounds like. We're going to be able to create multiple paths using this function. In our use case, we want to create a page for each one of our colors. So we want to loop through that colors array that we made and create a route for each one of those. We don't want them to be able to go to /white or whatever because we don't have white in our color array. We just want to have pages for each one of the colors that we defined in colors.json. So I'm going to import that colors.json first. And I misspelled colors. So fun. So I'm going to import that data here, and then I'm going to map through that array. So what I'm doing is I'm going to return this object. The key is going to be params, and the value is going to be another object, color set to color.name. So this key needs to match this parameter name for my route. If I had multiple parameters within my route, so if I had /colors/ID or something like that, both of them in square brackets, then I would need to have both the color and the ID parameter within here. And it's going to be the color.name in our case. And then I'm going to return this path array within object. I'm going to say fallback is set to false. And this will make it so that I get a 404 page if I go to a color that does not exist. And so Next.js is looking for a data structure in this format. So it is an object with the paths key. That paths key is an array of objects, each with the params, and then the params set to the actual parameters for the route. So that's step one. Step two is to define a second function that Next.js is going to look for called getStaticProps. and it's going to get the params passed to it. So one of the params objects that we defined in here is going to get passed to this one, and the one that is passed is dependent on the color itself that we're trying to render. So for the fuchsia page, the object would be this params color and then fuchsia. And what I'm going to do within this function is I'm going to search within the colors array for the full information about that color, because remember, our colors have both the hexadecimal and the name associated with them, and so we're going to find that full color information right here in this function. And I'm going to use .find, which is a lesser known cousin of .filter. So if you've ever used .filter in JavaScript, it's going to be a higher order function that looks for all items that match a condition within JavaScript. .find is only going to find the first item that fits that condition. So this is really handy when you just want to find one item that matches the condition within the array. Then you don't need to do like array sub-0 or anything like that just to get the first item within it. So what I'm doing is I'm searching for the color in the colors array whose name matches the .color from this parameter. So this color right here. And so I'm trying to find the full object where the name is fuchsia, for example. And that will give me the full hexadecimal matched up with the color name. Then from here, I'm going to return props color. This is going to pass this data to my actual React component. So my React component, I want to have the color information associated with it. And so I'm going to be able to do that using this get static props. And Next.js needs it to be in this format in order to do so properly. And within a larger application, within these functions, you'd most likely be making API calls instead of mapping through static data. So you'd probably be calling to some API, creating a route for each different item within that API, and then finding that individual API path within here. You can just use a fetch like normal to do so. You could also iterate through files on your operating system as well. So if you wanted to have a bunch of markdown files for a blog or something like that, you could also loop through those in something like this get static paths and this get static props. The get static paths is to generate all of the different paths for that component. So fuchsia and red and white and blue and all of that. Get static paths is doing that. Get static props is passing the props to that individual instance of the component or the page. So now I'm going to create my React component. I'm going to do it here at the top. I'm going to call it color, and I'm going to destructure the props color. So again, the props are going to be passed from this get static props function. So I have the color attribute, and so I'm going to have the color attribute here to grab. So I'm going to create a div with the class name color page. I'm going to add some style to it. So the background color is going to be set to the color.hex. So I'm going to use that hex code from my color object in order to fill that in and provide a background for my page. Then I'll have a h1 that has my color name. Okay, so let's look back at my colors.json and test out one of these pages. So I'm going to go to Marcella, and you can see that when I navigate to there, I have the full color information and the background color set to the color. So to walk back through this, get static paths made it so that there was a path for each one of my colors. So if I go to gray, which was not one of the colors in my colors.json, I'm going to get a 404 page because that is not in my colors array. So again, with this fallback false, it will give me a 404. It's only going to create the paths for the colors that exist. So greenery or Marcella, for example. Then the get static props is going to take the params from the URL, so in this case greenery, and it's going to loop through this colors array, find the color where the color name matches the params.color, and then return that full color information. So not just the name of the color, which is in the URL parameter, but also that hex code as well. And then that gets passed to my React component for the page, the color component here, and the background color is going to be set to the colors hexadecimal, and then the color's name is going to be rendered on the page as well. I'm going to replace the CSS in the CSS files, so I'm going to go to Styles, Global CSS, and swap this out. Again, I'll link this down in the description, but it's not a CSS tutorial, so I won't focus on it too much. This just makes it so that now my background color takes up the whole page and it looks just a little bit better. This is completely unrelated to Next.js. It's just making the page look less sloppy. So now I'm going to go back to index.js, and index.js is the home page. So this one's the only one that follows a slightly different rule than the other. Instead of it being an empty file name.js, instead the home page is index.js and the component's called home. And you can see that you can use these CSS modules if you want. Again, I'm not a fan of these, so I'm going to just strip them, but if you're interested, you could use those. So you can see that there is the head here. This head component is imported from Next, and it allows you to insert things into the head tag within HTML. So everything else is going to be in the body, but this gets inserted into the head. So you might want to change the title for the app, for example. Colors. And now you can see that my title attribute changed right there. You can also create a description for your app linked to your favicon. So I am going to make it so that this home page lists all of my colors and links to their pages. So I'll import colors. I made that same typo twice with fullers instead of colors. Too funny. So I'm going to say import colors from data colors.json. Then I'm going to map through them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to import another component from Next. So you can see that it imported the image component before. I'll delete the styles too, but I'm going to change this to be the link component instead. Next also has some image properties as well, so if you want to look into that, it's in the documentation. But we will create an instance of the link component here, and this will allow you to do single page-esque routing between pages. Just has that nice smooth transition instead of like a choppy jump. So I'm going to link to each one of my color pages. So I'll use string interpolation here. Typing is hard, so link to the color's name, and then h2 with the actual color.name. And this should be a lowercase c. So now you can see that I have a link to each one of these. And if I click on Marcella, for example, it'll link to that page. Rose Quartz is a pretty one. So now we have our completed app. I want to talk a little bit about some other options within Next.js. So within here, you can see that I used get static props and get static paths, and this is going to create a statically generated Next.js app. And what that means is that our data is only fetched at build time. So that's perfect for this type of application where I just have data coming from a JSON. That JSON is not going to change during runtime or have anything added to it without me redeploying the app. So every time I run npm run build, it's going to rebuild this application, repull from that colors.json. So the end user is going to have HTML generated for them, and this makes a pretty performant web app that can be cached by a CDN and lead to some pretty good user experience. This also would be a good use case for a blog app or something like that, where the page only rebuilds whenever you add a new blog post or something along those lines. That being said, some apps, say one that has a changing API pretty rapidly or something along those lines, you don't want to have a statically generated site, because then you're going to have to rebuild and redeploy your app every time something changes. And so Next.js also offers server-side rendering, and server-side rendering is going to look pretty similar, but instead of doing get static paths and get static props, you would do get server-side props instead, and do your logic and then return props just like you would right here. So it's going to look very, very similar to this get static props function here. I have a full blog post about the difference between SSR and SSG, or server-side rendering and static site generation, and I'll link to it in the description as well. If you just want to use Next.js for your routing or something along those lines, you can still within your React component do a use effect to fetch your data or something along those lines, and then in that case, you don't need to do the static site generation or server-side rendering or anything like that, other than if you want to have a bunch of dynamic routes or something along those lines. So again, Next.js has this really amazing developer experience. It has great error messages, it has comprehensive and very understandable documentation, and it's super powerful as well. I hope this tutorial was helpful. I would love your feedback. Please let me know what you would like to see next. If this video was helpful, throw a thumbs up on it and subscribe to the channel so you get to see my next videos. Thank you so much.